in 1900, November the 1st. I will tell you a little about how my folks met and how they came up here. They grew up together in the same ward. They lived right across the street from one another all their life. So they knew pretty well themselves. They worked in their ward, in the church. They were always active in the church, and they had many wonderful times. I've heard Mother tell their experience, and I thought I had the most wonderful mother that ever lived. They came from Newton, Utah. That's where they were born. And that's about 8 miles from Logan. And they was married in the Logan Temple in 1889 or 1890, somewhere around there. I heard Father tell a lot of his experience on the old Rigby farm, telling how he drove oxen. One time he was rolling the land with a heavy roller and going around the field, but seemed like the ox knew when it was noon. So when they come to the place where they go into for dinner, they whirl and started to go in, and Father fell down in front of the roller, hollered, "Whoa, whoa," and they stopped. And the roller laid up, it ran up on his legs. And all this time he was piling clods in front of him, so if the oxen did start, they would take some of the weight off from him. So finally, Aunt Sarah came out, heard them holler, and backed the oxen off from him, and he was saved that way. And he had many incidents. Was very interested. You should read his history. They were married in the Logan Temple in 1890. And 2 weeks after, they came up in a covered wagon from Newton to Rexburg, leading a cow behind the wagon. They took them 8 days to come up. They crossed the Snake River on a ferry, and they landed in Rexburg in November. When they landed, they had $12 to see them through the winter. But Dad, he hauled freight from Market Lake, that's where Roberts is now, and the snow was very deep. The roads were not very good. Sometimes there was no road, they drifted over. And I've heard him say he would have to wade in snow up around his race. So he didn't have a very easy time of it. They stayed in Rexburg that winter, and in the summer he would go out to the farm, clear the sagebrush, and they were just finishing the house on the farm, a log house. You all know the house, we lived in it. And they stayed the second winter in Rexburg. When Lester was born, mother went back to Newton to her mother, and where he was born. But the next, when Harlow was born, he was born in Rexburg. And he would go out on the farm. It was all covered with sagebrush. There was no roads they come straight through the fields to Rexburg at that time because there were no fences and that. They had to build fences. They built ditches to irrigate the farm, and he helped build the canals. The Island Ward Canal came out of Teton River up in Salem, and they had to build the canal, and when they got down straight east from our place, he took our ditch out and built it down to the farm. And he had to build ditches. The place wasn't very level. He had to build dikes, build the ditches in. Then he had to take the ditches around the high places to get to water. It was we had sub-irrigation. There was a big pond in the middle of the field, which they control the sup with. I think you all remember the old pond pasture, where you had many experience on that pond. And so the farm was not like it looks today. When I was 2 years old, Dad went on a mission to West Virginia. He went without purse or strip. What little money Mother could send him, because they didn't have any in them days. Uncle Alvin came up and ran the farm while he was away. When he was there, he met his wife, Aunt May, who lived in Hibbert at that time. And I was born and was two years old when he went. And he came back when I was 4. I remember just about the first thing I remember, we went down to Grandma's to see him come in to Cass Junction. And I remember going upstairs, looking out of the window, and I could see the train come in that he was on. And we was all very tickled to see him because he'd been gone for 2 years. The first 10 years of their life, they were very busy, as I said before, clearing the land. And the children was born, Lester, Harlow, and Ollie, and Hazel. Hazel died 6 weeks after she was born, and Viola and myself before Dad went on his mission. And we were very busy for the first 10 years of my life. We cleared the land. I remember piling sagebrush in the daytime, and we children would go out and have bonfires in them at night. During this 10 years, Dad accumulated quite a bit of stuff. He had sheep, 1,200 head at one time, and he had cattle, and we had horses, pigs, chickens, turkeys, and ducks on the farm. Whenever we needed food, we'd go out and kill one of them. We did not buy much stuff at the stores. We raised it on the farm, raised our potatoes and all our food. I remember taking wheat to the flour mill and getting it ground for flour. Each year we planted more land and had more to do. When Dad took up this land up to Rexburg, he took up 160 acres, which was the limit. And he traded 80 acres to Dad for our home. So he had 80 acres of his own up there. And I remember going up, working on this farm up to Rexburg, east of the Ricks College. And I would go up there and plow and harrow. It wasn't very big. I remember I had to get up on the wagon to put the harness on the horses. And I turned their collars upside down to fasten it, and then put it up towards his head to turn it around where it should be. And we was always busy, had a lot of work. Dad had, as I said, sheep, quite a few cattle, and always kept us busy. We wouldn't get done with our chores till around 10 o'clock at night. So I didn't have much time to study. Dad kept me out in the fall, and then again in the spring. When his farming come, I stayed out of school again. So I didn't get much education, which I've missed all my life. I remember one year we had the old horsepower thrashing machine. The rod run out away from the thrashing separator and had 8 horses go around and around pulling, making power for the separator. And they had 2 men at the mouth which would cut the band on the bundles and feed them into the thrasher. And they had 2 men out on the tail end to stack the straw, and had to have a bagger and a separator man. So there was quite a few men for Mother to feed. And they all liked to come to Mother's because she furnished good food and all they could eat. We got wood to burn. On the place there was willows. Then we'd go down on the river and get wood. And that is how we got wood to burn. We had coal, but we mostly burnt wood. I know we had hardships, seemed like everybody had at that time. And when we thrashed, the neighbors would come and help us thrash, and we would go and help the neighbors. We never had any money to pay out, but we did help one another that way. I know Mother was always busy. We milked cows, and we separated. Then the cream we'd put in churn and churn it into butter. And Mother would mold it into pounds, and then she'd take it to town and sell it. That's how she got her food, by selling butter and eggs. We already had eggs to sell. We had sheep, mostly Harlow. He would go up in the hills in the summertime and move camp. Seemed like there were 2 of them up there at the time, the herder and the camp mover. They let the sheep feed in a direction, and then they'd move the camp up that night to where they would be at night. And Harlow would go to school. He'd never miss school. He went to college, Rick's College. Then he went to Salt Lake, the university in Salt Lake. When he got through the University of Salt Lake, he went back to Massachusetts, to Harvard. So he spent most of his time in school, but he would come in the summertime and shear sheep. I've known him to shear 200 head a day, and that's quite a few. I remember going out once after him in the buggy out to the shearing corrals, which was north of St. Anthony, Split Buttes. Remington had a shearing corral there, and I went out after him, and they weren't hardly through. I had to wait 3 days before we could come home. While we was waiting, I got in the chute and helped gear the sheep into the little pens where the shearers picked them out to shear them. And one old sheep ran into me, and I put out my knees to hit her, and she knocked my kneecap off. Well, they laid me on some wool, and they all tried to come and put that kneecap back on. Harlow went on to the University of Utah studying medicine, and he couldn't get it on. They all stopped shearing but one man. So when they couldn't get it on, they went back to shearing. And then a man standing there, I said, lift me up on my one leg, because it was sure paining. As he was lifting me up, it slipped back in place. Now I was sure happy over that, because they was out getting the buggy ready to bring me into the hospital. And it wouldn't have been very nice ride over those rocks and on the way in. And I had many experiences like that. When I was 8 years old, I was baptized in the slough down from the house on the 1st of November, 1908, on my birthday. Brother Oyson Ricks lived up above on a hill, and he came down as his father in baptizing me. And I went to Sunday school. After I come home from Sunday school, I went out, herd sheep, turned them out, because the lucerne was high and they would get bloated. I just herded them. Then I put them back in the corral and went to sacrament meeting, where I was confirmed. I well remember that. Our first phone, we had a phone, and few people around had phones. but we could call one another. We had tri-cell batteries in the phone, which we ring ourselves. There'd be a long and a short, long and one short, long and two shorts, and so on. Long, two longs and a short, and we'd all know our phone numbers. But if we wanted to phone outside of our place, we would have to phone central to connect us up wherever we wanted to. I remember once the Derek went by our place and tore down our telephone line. And we kids, Mother was always busy. Her and the girls, I remember the sheep used to go under the fences. Therefore, they left their wool on the bottom wire. And Mother would have us kids go out and pick wool off from the fences. And she would card it to make quilts out of. She and the girls were always busy making quilts and cooking for the men folks. As I said before, we had a lot of sheep. We had about 1,200 head of herd. And in the spring, they would lamb. We'd have to take care of them. Be somebody not with them all night, because sometimes the weather would be cold. When the lambs come, we had to take them into the shed and put them in little pens with their mother. I remember lots of time I was out, and when the lamb come, get a hold of its legs and drag it in. Besides the sheep, we had quite a few cattle. We milked cows. Ever since I remember. I used to have to milk cows when I just stood up on my feet and reached the bags to milk. And seemed like we was as busy in the wintertime as we were in the summer. There was no let up in the work. And we had irrigation farm and dry farm. We was always had something to do. On a rainy day, we would have to go down men's sacks. See, in 1908, we started to build the big brick house down where it is. We was busy hauling lumber. Bert Wilmore, Eve's brother, built it. And that is when Eve came up to help his brother build in the building. And that is where he met Viola. And it come out that he married her. We had to hang our butter and milk and thing down the old well to keep them cool as much as possible. In the wintertime, we'd go down on the river and saw chunks of ice, and we'd haul them up and put sawdust over them. And we had ice mostly all summer to make ice cream and one thing and another. We always had ice cream, made ice cream in the summer. Mother, she was always active. She was in the Relief Society. Sister Foss was president. Mother was first counselor, and Sister Ricks, Orson Ricks, was second counselor. I remember when they were in the lodge house, them three would sit up all night sewing, making clothes for the dead. In them days, the Relief Society laid out the dead and made clothes to bury them with. And they had many work to do. I know the saints there, they paid their tithing in wheat and whatever they had, didn't have much cash, chickens and eggs. And the Relief Society would have to, what wouldn't keep, scatter them out among the poor. Father was put in bishop in 1906, and he put in 23 years. I was 6 years old when he went in, and 29 years old when he went out. And he was always busy. He'd be called up during the night to go and minister to the sick. And he was gone nearly all the time with his bishop work. And I remember a lot of the home didn't have no phone, and if he wanted a message to the people, he'd put me on a little pony and send me to their place to deliver the message. I know I had a little pony which was an Indian pony. Dad got it down to Blackfoot. After we got in the brick house, seemed like we had a lot of company. Father's family lived in Teton Basin, and he had about 6 brothers. There was 14 in his family. They would come down from the basin, and they came down in wagons or buggies, and they would stay a week. I remember lots of time Aunt Ella, and Aunt Zina, and Aunt Letha, and Uncle Elmer, and we spent nights around the piano singing. They was all very good singer, and they sure liked to sing. So we had pleasant times along with the hardships. I remember going, in 1910, we moved down in the new home, and it seemed like we always had plenty to do with farming. We farmed with horses. I think we had about 15 or 20 head of horses we'd have to feed and curry and harness them, water them every morning before we would go into breakfast. And that was quite a chore. Clean out the barn, feed sheep, feed pigs, and everything like that. So it took us a couple hours in the morning to get the chores done before we could get into the field. Then we we raised sugar beets, quite a few acres. We'd have to thin them and hoe them, and we cultivated them. And in the fall, it would get late, so we would go out, plow them out, and put them in piles. And I remember lots of time the snow would come and cover the piles, and we would rake back the snow and top those beets. Then we'd have to throw them in to the wagon and haul them to the beet dump. We had beet dump pretty close where we only had to haul them about 2 or 3 miles or maybe 1 mile. But it would be quite late before we could get them all taken care of. So we planted a lot of wheat. We had to cut hay with horse mower. It would take about 2 weeks to cut it with the mower. Then we'd have to haul it. And the way we hauled it was we had 3 hay racks, and they'd go back and forth. One man would be at the haystack handling the fork, and Dad would be up on the stack, and we'd have 3 men out in the field pitching hay onto the wagon, and one boy dropping the hay and one driving the teams in and out. So we would haul hay for maybe a week, and by the time we get the first drop in, it'd be pretty near time to start the second drop. Then we cut the train with the binder, and as Gordon knows what that is because I put him on the horse to keep him a-going. As I said a while back, I remember the old horsepower thrashing machine, and that turned into the next was a steam engine, pulled a big separator around, and there would be quite a few men to help with that. Then the next came the tractor, and it pulled the smaller separator, and we thrashed with them quite a few years. It would take, I was leveling once with the leveler, and it was kind of wet, and the leveler clogged up. So I went back, lifted the leveler up to the back end, and told the horses to go. And when I hollered whoa, they didn't stop. They just kept on a-going. So I ran up to the side of the leveler and reached over for the line, and I fell in, and the leveler went over me, and it cut a gash in my head. And I had many experiences like that. I went to school as much as I could. I remember I would always have to hurry home and get on the leveler or get busy doing something, and we'd come in late. Then we'd have all our chores to do. Time you take care of a bunch of horses and feed all the animals and that. It'd be close to 10 o'clock before we would come in. We all had our work to do. Sometimes Willie was a little slow, and I would help him with his. Well, I had a close friend, Olaf Johnson, lived about a block from the old house, and him and we used to go swimming together. I remember once I was herring below his place. He come along that old railroad we had run through our place and said, "Come on, let's go swimming." So I tied my horses up and went swimming with him. And later on, Dad seen the horses wasn't going, so he come over and I got a licking at that time. And then I had Lawrence Lutz, Henry Nestor, and several of close friends. Well, we always, I don't want you to think that I worked all the time. We always had a time on a Saturday afternoon. We would go scouting. There was about 15 scouts in Hibbard, and we would play games and learn how to do things. I remember one game we played, we put a barrel at each end of the field, about 50 rod long, and we put so many potatoes in one barrel. Then we would be on our horses with a long stick, sharping, and we'd go to one with the potatoes and chap the potato and haul it down to the other end, and one that got through the quickest beat, of course. Then I was ordained a deacon when I was 12 years old, and I put in president of the deacon quorum. And in them days, the deacon on Saturday, they would go out and cut wood for the widows, or do their duty in that way. And we had a good deacon quorum. Then the same way the teacher, him and Hattie was married the day before he left, and he went to Samoa. And about a month after, Hattie was about this time. Dad got an automobile, a Hatmobile, first one I remember, and it had carbine lights on, and it had to crank it, and sometimes the lights would go out, and so we carried a big lantern put on the front of the car to use it for our lights. And then we got Model T Ford, and then we had a Model A Ford, and there was a man come up from Salt Lake, sold Dad a Packard. It was a big car, and he paid $4,000 for it, second-handed. He had it for 2 years, then he traded it in for a Hudson. He got $200 out of it. So that was pretty expensive car. I remember he gave this whole paycheck to pay for this Packard car. That was one thing that kind of ruined him. And he invested money into Snip Store and in the bank there at Rexburg, Farmers Equity, and then the coal mine, and he lost all that money. And it was hard on him because he hadn't paid for the house yet that he built. He borrowed $8,000 from a man named Hanson, and it seemed like when once Lester and Harlow was all thrashing, helping the neighbors. They worked all day, then they come home, and Lester had hurt his hand in the thrashing machine that day. And so Dad wanted Harlow to go out when he got home. And Harlow told him he wouldn't do it and went in the house. Of course, Dad said, "You will do it." So Harlow went in the house and went in the bathroom and locked the door. Well, Dad was kind of out of sort, so he took the axe, and I believe he would have chopped the door down if it hadn't have been that Grandma Rigby was there and talked him out of it. But Lester and I, we fixed the fence with his bad hand. So, of course, I don't want you to think that we had a bad father. We didn't. He was very good to us. We had as much as any other young man in the country, but he had a lot of worries, and he worked hard himself. He put in lots of hours, and then he had at that time, he had about 150 head of cattle with his bishopric at work and running the farm, everything. He sure was worried on him. Seemed like if they had I worked on both farms at home. I'd work and sometime load up a load of hay, put 4 head of horses on it, and I would leave to go to the dry farm at Canyon Creek. And I'd get to Newdale about dark, and I would have to go up the rest of the way in the dark. I go around those hills and up and down them with 4 head of horses, no brakes on them. Sometimes it was a little dangerous, but I always made it. I know one time I got up there at 1 o'clock at night, and I unhooked my horses and went to bed up there. And we had many experiences like that. Always. One fall, on the dry farm, when harvest come, Dad would send me up to help Uncle Almy. And one fall, we cut 500 or 600 acres with the binder. and that was pretty slow work. We had 2 team of horses. We took shifts, kept the binder going all daylight time. And we had a couple of men shocking the train. And that fall we had thrash machine come in there, and we hauled it to the thrash machine on wagons. And it rained quite a bit. I think the thrashers was in there about a month, and Aunt May sure got tired of cooking for them. And then we'd have to haul them sacks down to Newdale. The next fall, we got a harvester, a combine, run by horsepower. Cogs run on the ground wheel, and they had to keep the horses going pretty good length to keep the harvester going at a certain speed. And we had 12 head of horses, 4 ahead of one another. That was quite a chore. Then the next fall, I think we could cut it 2 falls with that. Then the next we got a combine pulled with horses. And that was quite a job, taking care of the horses and sewing the sacks on the harvester, and the sacks was laying all over the field. They gave me the job of hauling the sacks down to Newdale. I had a high wagon, and we loaded 100 sacks on it, and I had 5 head of horses, 3 head on lead, and I would take it down to Newdale and come back and load it up for the next morning. And I did that for quite a while. And them old sacks, they weighed about 130 pounds. And time you lift them up on that wagon and throw them up on there, there'd be 2 of us. It was quite a job. We would do our summer following in the summer. It'd take all summer to do them, nearly. We had 12 head of horses on a 3-bottom plow, 4 press in head of one another. Made quite a herd around the field all day long, and not as fast as they do it nowadays. And we worked off and on like that for quite a few years. We had some advancement. The harvesters, the combine, they got engines on them to run the machinery with, and that run a lot better. Keep the speed to a certain fast and where it should be. And then we got the advancement of, I don't hardly remember the year when we did get a tractor on the dry farm, but it was right around 1920. So we had quite a few years working with horses. They would get sore neck, sore shoulders, and work in that hot sun all day. and it was sure tough on the horses as well as on us men folks. I'd get up in the morning about daylight, get on a horse and go about a mile up to the pasture and get them. Then I'd have to get them in. We'd have to get them in and feed them oats and curry them and harness them all. And done all this before we went into breakfast. Then we'd come out and hook them up and go for the day. Not like it is nowadays. Now they get out and step on the tractor, turn the key, and away they go. But I remember I used to run up to the side of the horses, throw cloths at the leaders, anyway, to keep them going. And they would get pretty weary during the summer. And the ground would get dry. I've seen lots of time when they just turn up cloths. The ground was so dry. And I would go to one farm to another. We had two dry farms, one up by Webster and the Canyon Creek, and of course the irrigated farm in Hibbard. Whenever they needed me worse, I would go there and help out. In the haying time, I would go home for this and help in the haying. And then wherever I was needed the most, I went and worked. I remember Willie and I plowed on the dry farm. I'd run the hand plow and he'd run the sulky where he could ride it. And it was a mile long. And as I said before, the horses would get sore shouldered and that, but that isn't all. I would get sore, caught it, and it was pretty tough. I appreciate life the way it is when we got the tractors and the way we could do it so much faster. We done our summer following maybe in a month or in 2 or 3 weeks with the tractors, where it took all summer with the horses. And it would be a relief not to have to feed, water them horses during the day at noon, morning, and at night. It kept us busy with the horses, but with the tractor we could just jump off and go to dinner and come and jump on and go again. It made a lot of difference. And I worked like that till I went on my mission. Of course, I had a lot of experience. I would come down at weekend and go and take my girls out. And I went with the girl by the old house. It wasn't like we had it. We didn't have no bathtub, no bathroom. We had to go outside to a little shack we had, and we had no bathtub. We wore a bath in a round tin tub, which Rima would hang curtains all around, and while we bathed. We had a coal stove. It was Gordon's job to get the kilns in every night, so we'd make a fire the next morning. And on Sunday night, it was his job to fill the boiler full of water so your mother could start washing Monday morning. She always washed on Monday. She washed on a scrubbing board. At first, she'd boil her clothes in the boiler, and she'd take them out and scrub them on the scrubbing board. And then she'd have to rinse them and hang them on the line outside. And it was pretty hard for her sometimes. I built a dirt cellar. We kept our vegetables in, like potatoes and carrots, onions, and we put our fruit down there. It had I worked for Dad a couple of summers there. And then one spring, Harlow bought a coal mine out to Yellow Jacket, west part of Idaho. And I just thought maybe I could earn a little more money by going out there. So Dad, he hired a man to work for him, and I went out the 1st of May to go out to the Yellow Jacket. There was quite a few of us went out, and we had to shovel snow from 40 over to the Yellow Jacket. And there was a pretty narrow road, lots of snow, and we had to shovel, and we had quite a time getting over in there. But we got over in that, and we went to work at the mines, and they worked at the mill to get it ready to run, and they got it going. And they had trucks to haul the ore down from the hills where the mines were, and they run these ore through the mill, and they got some silver and a little gold. The ore run about $8 a ton, and there was plenty of it, the whole mountain of ore. And it would have paid if it hadn't cost so much to run it and to haul it to where they had a railroad. I was given the job of working in the assay office. They would bring samples down from the hill, from the mine, and I would smash it down like flour. And then Bo Garn, he worked in the assay office, and he would cook the ore. When he cooked it, it all settled, the silver would settle to the bottom, and that's the way they found out how much ore, how much gold was in how much silver was in the ore. And then when I wasn't doing that, and I was panning ore, and panning gold, the silver, come out of the sand would come out of the mill from these cloths, and they would put it in a tub full of water, and I would stand there all day, some day panning this sand. So I put in the summer till about July. I come down and got my family and took them up. I bought a pickup from Ford and took a load of groceries out and my family, and we moved into a little shack about 1.5 miles from the mine. And every night and morning I would walk down to the mine along this water flue. They had a flue take the water down to the mill, use it for power to run the mill. And it had been built 40 years before that. So some of the timber was poorly, and I had my pocket full of rags, stuff the holes up so the water couldn't run out much. So we ran it that way that summer, and at the Gordon and Ruth, Leo was about 1.5 to 2 years old, and they had quite a time roaming the hill. One day, the three of them went up to Silver Mine. That was a little mine that was about 1/2 mile from the shack. And they went up there, and their mother lost track of them. And she couldn't find them. She hollered and tried to get them to answer. So she got all excited. She went down to Curry. That was the name of the people that lived down about 1/4 mile from the shack. Gordon used to go down there, and he'd go with Mrs. Curry fishing, and they caught a lot of fish there in the creek. So she went down there and called up down to the mill where I was, and I went up there, and lo and behold, she said they come down this hill, the children did, singing and laughing, and they was having a good time. But she was sure worried over them when she couldn't find them. So we went on that summer till about September, when the flume busted. One section of it went out, and it washed the hill out, the road, and that goes to the mill, and it didn't have no water power for the mill, so it stopped everything. And so they took time to build a new road, and all the men went out, and Harlow left me there alone to look after things. And I was out there for about 2 weeks, all alone. He left me his dog, which was a comfort to me, and whenever he heard anything, he would wake me up barking. There was a herd of goat, about 6 or 8 goats, rambling around that country. There was some people down the creek mining gold, and they had the goat that they would milk for milk, and they went all over. So they'd come there sometime in the middle of the night, and the dog would wake me up, barking at them. And I stayed there for 2 weeks and tearing down buildings and working a little what I felt like doing. I had a whole groceries room full of groceries. I had a half a beef hanging there, so I could cook me anything I wanted. And I uh, didn't enjoy being there alone, but I got along. So I come down and worked at the sugar factory that fall. And it didn't run only about 6 weeks. And I'd earned enough to pay my debts and to get a few things that we needed. And then I went back out to the mine and worked for 2 months. We worked one tunnel, building it up, and I shoveled the dirt and that had come down through these poles. It had been worked for quite a few years ago, but the poles would rotten and the earth would fill the tunnel up. So we had about 20 feet of tunnel to go through. We rebuilt with poles. We would have to put caps in them and then drive the poles so the dirt wouldn't run down. So we worked for a month in that mine, and we come to the end of the vein of silver that was running through, led us on to believe that there was silver in there. But we come to the end of that vein, ran out of silver, so we moved from there down to the main mill, up on that big hill where there were 3 tunnels. So we went in the lower tunnel and picked up it for another month, and we got through the cave where it had caved in, and then we went back a little ways. There's another pile of dirt in the tunnel, and Scotty, the man that was the boss, him and I, we climbed over this pile of dirt, and there was just room for us to crawl back. And went back in the mine for about a mile. And boy, they had done a lot of work 40 years before we was out there. And I had never expected to see what I had seen, where they had worked and cleaned out tunnels, and where they had make bin to put ore in, and then they would reel it outside. It's hard to tell just how it was, but I had my eyes open. I'm glad we went back in there, but it was kind of dangerous. We crawled over that pile of dirt, as I told you, and if more dirt would have rolled down, it'd have fastened us in there, and we couldn't have got out. So we worked there till the snow got so we could get out, and then I come home. And Rima was glad I did, because she was getting the milk. She didn't have any money, and so I went back to my father and worked that spring. And it seemed like whenever I couldn't get any work, I'd always go back to my father and he would give me work. So I would work down there all day and then come home and with a gallon of milk. And so we moved back down to the old house that spring, and I worked for him that summer. And the next summer, I rented the 80 acres from him, and I run it on a share basis. And I made thing didn't pay out very much, so I bought the next year after that. I bought the 80. I give $6,000, paid $200 down. Then I was to pay the market company, the Federal Land Bank, so much a year on it. And I was there for, and then we run the place for a couple of years. Then we built our home down on the west end. Grandpa Jacobs was the carpenter. He built it, and we all helped. We run the cement with the cement mixer and wheelbarrows, and we done all the hard work ourselves. And Leo and Gordon would help on the house, help lay the floor, and work help Grandpa in the house. So we were mighty thankful when we got it done. We moved down there nearly before it was finished. Grandpa would finish one room, and we'd move in it, and while he was finishing the others. So then after we moved down there, well, Gordon went on a mission, and he went to the Southern States Mission, and we enjoyed his letters when we got them, and he enjoyed his mission. When he come home, he would get home a little while, and he was called in the Army, and he went for 2 years in the Army, and so he wasn't home much after that. And when he was home, he worked for Harlow, and I had a few his cattle, fed them in the winter, and we'd take them up to Harlow's for the summer, and Harlow would pasture them and furnish the trucks to haul them up. So Harlow has always been good to me and my family, and he never turned us down if we wanted anything. So and Leo come along, and he wanted to go on a mission, but he had to wait a year before he could go on account of the war. They could only send one missionary out, I think it was a month. And when his turn came, he went to the Western States Mission. That wasn't very far from him. And he enjoyed his mission. While he was in Sheridan, Wyoming, Cheryl and Ruth took us out to the Black Hills. Lorna was along, and we went to the Black Hills, went to the show out there, to the pageant, and we went in the caves and saw a lot of beautiful scenery. We went through Sheridan and saw Leo. and he was doing his missionary work. We stayed there one night, and Gerald went out with Leo, tracting there, visiting saints. While Gordon was in Washington, training in the Army, we struck it lucky one fall and made good money out of our potatoes. Jacobson come down when his man come down when we were taken, and he said he'd give us $3 a hundred. But I had already hired the bins, and I told him I had to put them in the bin. Now I had the bins, and he said, "I'll give you $4 in December." So I told him they were his, so he contracted them for $4. And he gave us the $4. That gave us a little extra money. So Reba and I, we got on the bus and went to San Francisco. Lily and Andy lived down there. And when we got in San Francisco, Andy met us, and we went out to her place, or out to Lily's place. Andy took us all over Washington, up those steep hills, and we went to the fish trough where they sell fish, all kinds. And we bought some, and we went out to Bruce's wife home, lived there in San Francisco, and we had a fish supper. And we went back to Andy and Lily's that night, Gordon, and he had somebody with him, pulled into Lily's. He was going to Fort R from Washington, and we had a visit with him. And then next morning he went on, and we went to down to Blanche's down in Frisco, and we stayed there a couple of days. We visited Blanche. Blanche took us out to the redwoods and took us around Frisco to show us the scenery. And then she took us down to L.A. We went to one of Arima's cousin, and we stayed with her for a couple of days. While we were there, we went different places to see the scenery, and we went to the Memorial Lawn, which was quite a sight. And we went around as much as we could, and then we had our visit with them. Then we got on the bus and came home. Soon after that, Gordon came home from Fort R, and he was going on over to Korea. And he had a few days home, and then he left to go to Korea. We were all quite upset at that time because we was fighting pretty hard over in Korea, and he took the ship, but when he was halfway over, the Korea's war quit. They signed that, but he went over where they had been fighting, and he spent a year over there. And then Leo came home from California. As I said before, he had to wait a year before he could go on his mission. And then the time came that he went on his mission, and he came home, and he was called into the army also. And he went out east to his training. And then after his training, he went to Korea also. So he just followed along in Gordon's footsteps. Went to Korea, and then they come home, and we were mighty thankful when they both was home from the army. Soon after that, Dick and Leanne took us on that wonderful trip. We went up to Washington, and we went across the lake in a ferry boat, and on down the west coast. And we went one night. We got a room in out of Washington, somewhere out there. And we that night we all got settled down in bed, and all at once Dick and Leanne bed spring dropped to the floor. They had quite a time, and we had quite a laugh over it. And Lorna throwed up, and I was something wrong with me. I don't know what it was. But we went on down the coast. The road was winding, and Dick would go around those curves, and he wore the rubbers off of his tires. But we got in San Francisco and went around there for a while, and then we went on down to L.A. Where the fish jump, Laree land, and we went to the temple there in Los Angeles, and went through the temple that night, one night, and they took us all around L.A., and then we came home. We enjoyed that trip very much. We wouldn't have got to go there unless Dick and Leanne took us. So we got 3 trips in. Gerald, Ruth, Reem and I went by ourselves. Dick and Leanne took us, and we wouldn't have got any of those trips if they hadn't took us.